Welcome to Healthy Conversations, sharing the knowledge, experience, stories, and the wisdom of herbalists and other natural healers, with your host, Stephen Horn. Today's guest, Thomas Easley. Hi, welcome to Healthy Conversations. I'm your host, Stephen Horn, and with me is my longtime friend and colleague, Thomas Easley, who is also the co-author of our very popular book, Modern Herbal Dispensatory. Thomas is also a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild, one of the finest clinical herbalists I know because he's got tons of experience with that. And he also runs the Eclectic School of Herbal Medicine. So welcome, Thomas, to the program.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
And because we both did a book on making herbal preparations, and one of the things we put in this book is different kinds or different categories of herbs and the fact that they're better in some forms than others. So we call that herbal energetics. And I think that a lot of herbal, people who are not that familiar with herbs don't understand what energetics is. So let's have a talk about that and to explain your take on energetics and then why it's so important.
So my take on energetics is maybe a little different than others. So bear with me for a second. My understanding is that the term energetics came from a chiropractor in the 1940s or 50s. The same guy that developed polarity therapy kind of coined the term energetics to talk about how herbs affect people. And the context here is that at this point in history, everybody was obsessed with magnetism and electricity. Mm-hmm. And people were in love with the idea that this invisible energy is what permeated life and drove everything. Before this time period, that wasn't a prominent part of the study of herbal medicine. They instead of referring to the energetics of herbs, they referred to the properties of herbs, the qualities of herbs, and depending upon how far back you go, the virtues of herbs. So in looking at the traditional literature focused around properties, qualities, and virtues, what we find is language that is really rich in describing sensory sensation. And we think about medicine at the time as being, depends on what time we're talking about. It's changed a lot over the last couple thousand years, but we think of it as being some combination of philosophy of life and how everything works, or natural philosophy, if we go back to Hippocrates, combined with empirical observation. Mm-hmm. And so we have these plants that strongly shift our sensory experience. A lot of times people skeptical or new to herbalism might say something like, but how do we know herbs work? And I think you taught me the example of, well, you could take some Cascara Sagrada and find out. But also, like, everyone has had the experience of eating cayenne pepper, spicy food, and feeling hot. Now, This doesn't mean that their body temperature increased, but they felt hot.
And they might have perspired a little bit, or the little sinus drainage or something. Something happened to your body when you took that.
There was a physiological response, and this was observed in all traditional systems of medicine. And not all plants, but many plants elicit a physiological response characterized by a change in one of our senses, in a change in our sense of temperature, or a change in our sense of smell or our sense of sound. Plants can dramatically change how we experience the world. And the ways in which they do this, and the types of plants that do this, and the patterns by which they do this were all recorded by these empiricists who then said, here is what we have seen, and here is how we believe the world works. So let's combine them together into a system of medicine. And so all traditional systems were this combination of empirical observation, largely of sensory changes with the philosophies. And it's from this that we find the properties, the qualities, and the virtues of plants. And then it was repackaged as energetics as people's understanding of how things work shifted. So as
Right.
philosophy shifted, the interpretation of the empirical evidence also shifted. And so
And,
what?
and originally, what I called this elemental models,
Mhm.
because that's one of the
Yes.
ways in which they categorize the things. They're air, water, fire, and earth, or they're vata, pitta, kapha, or they're the metal, earth, fire, wood, water in Chinese medicine, yin yang,
Right. Right.
etc. And these were ways of kind of describing these things metaphorically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that as a metaphorical language, energetics describes the experience of being ill better than anything we have.
Yeah.
Um, this also is important to maybe to mention that a natural human tendency is for over time metaphor to become mythos and to be interpreted differently. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's important when we look at traditional literature to try to understand the context and the broader life philosophy that was prevalent at the times that these works are being written. But the takeaway for me is that traditional systems of medicine using what we now think of as energetics were really elegant systems of relieving suffering in a way that modern biomedicine and its reductionistic model just completely misses.
Well,
Um,
and also it better describes kind of the overall effect of the herb. Like, for example, okay, if we just go off of scientific literature, we can find studies that cinnamon lowers blood sugar, that gymnema lowers blood sugar, that uh, uh, nopal lowers blood sugar. But cinnamon is warm and astringent, and nopal is mucilaginous and cooling,
mhm,
and gymnema is more bitter and cooling. So there's an effect overall to the plant that is not just dependent on how it affects a particular biological process.
right.
And so when you're looking at the bigger picture of the herb, energetics helps you see, okay, cinnamon would be appropriate for someone who has blood sugar problems, who also tends to be damp and cold in their overall body temperament. Whereas
Mhm.
nopal, if they've got, you know, uh, irritation in their colon and they're more tends to inflame, would be a better choice for that person, right?
Mhm.
So it does help us make good clinical decisions, I think, to look at
Yeah,
that overall kind of metaphorical action of what that plant does.
I totally agree, and I think that when we take into account energetics, uh, we're adding a human touch to our selection of herbs. You know, it's not this sterile thing where here's this research showing this one component does this one thing in the body. Also, there are herbs that don't have strong, discernible energetic actions.
Right.
Maybe they taste in a way that we think of energetically, but they might not create the same actions as other herbs that taste that way. And so, as clinicians, we're always in this balancing act of like what is the physiological imbalance going on. And sometimes those are discernible and sometimes they aren't. A lot of times people don't realize they have hypertension until they go to the doctor. They don't have symptoms that would benefit from being shifted. They have a silent maladaptation. And I think that herbs sometimes have these silent actions that aren't readily apparent through energetics, but can be paired with states of physiological imbalance or disease. When we, and that's a valid way
Well,
of approaching herbalism.
TCM does that. TCM
Mhm.
doesn't just base energetics on how it tastes or the initial reaction. They also base it on how it affects the body
Right.
over the long haul. So, traditional energetic systems were developed over time
Right.
with lots of people using herbs and reporting their effects and kind of coming to a kind of consensus of what they do, which,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's
And
very helpful information for a clinical setting
mhm,
because you're sitting here as an herbalist and you've got a person with a particular problem and you've got 10 herbs to choose from, right?
right.
So which ones are going to be best for this particular client? And I think that's one of the things that's not addressed in the double blind studies. Yeah, it works for a certain number of people, but it doesn't work for other people. So what's the difference between the people it works for and the people it doesn't work for? And I think that's what we're trying to define somewhat
Mhm.
with herbal energetics is who is the person who's most likely to benefit from this particular remedy.
Right. So I'm in the middle of writing a section for my bigger philosophy piece right now called "How We Get Better," and in that I try to explore some of the complications of the placebo effect. Right. So there's a difference between how placebo effect is used in research studies versus how it's used in everyday language or even clinically. In research studies, they are looking for the specific effect of the pharmacological agent, and to do that, they have to account for the tremendous improvements that most people get, no matter what treatment they use, and so they have a control group and they say, okay, this group that is matched, the control group that's matched to the intervention group and improves, tells us what our natural baseline for improvement is. And we can therefore identify the specific effect above and beyond that in the treatment group versus the control group. But that placebo effect is comprised of numerous components, right? You have the natural course of the disease, like self-limiting diseases or relapsing remitting diseases, come and go and naturally get worse and get better. And the trend over time is for improvement. And so part of it is that, but part of it is the expectation of the person receiving the treatment or the inert placebo. And part of that is the expectation of the clinician. And part of that is behavioral changes that people receiving treatment go through unconsciously. And there's all of these different components. Uh, Dr. Moraman has proposed that a better way to look at placebos, both in RCTs and clinically, is to differentiate between the natural course of the disease and what he calls the meaning effect. And this is essentially the combined effect of the therapeutic alliance, of the Hawthorne effect, of regression, basically all of the stuff that they try to control for in studies that don't involve the natural improvement of the disease, he would classify as the meaning response or the meaning effect. And he would say essentially that when we receive empathetic care, and an explanation for, even if it's not accurate, for why we feel the way we feel. It gives us a sense of control over our life. It makes us feel better
Mm-hmm.
because we have an improved sense of control. And in large part, the suffering that we experience, whether it's from disease or not, is either due to or at least revolves around how we make meaning of the feelings that we have in our body.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Like I've read in a naturopath's book, he's a Senator Samuel Thompson. His name was Robert Thompson, and he talked about or I think it was him. Talked about a client that came and just for the whole hour, first hour, yak 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 yak. And they said, "I'm sorry, you have to end this. We'll have to finish next time." She came the second time, yak 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 yak. Okay, and he just listened, and then he had to end it again. When she came the third time, she says, "You've helped me more than any practitioner has."
Yep. Yeah. One of my favorite stories to illustrate the power of expectation and meaning is I had a booth at a conference, and this person came and said, "I have this horrible neck pain and headache, and I can't focus on classes, and I paid to be at this conference, and I need to feel better to get to this intensive." And I said, "Okay, I have a roll-on liniment. It has really strong plants in it. It has, datura, it has amanita, it has gelsemium, it has all of these low-dose plants, but it's in a roller bottle, and all you have to do is roll it on, and that will that'll prevent you from getting too much and absorbing too much, and it should be just enough to help." And so she got the bottle and she walked off, and she came back between her next class, maybe an hour and a half later, and she said, "This is the most amazing product I have ever used for pain. Within 5 minutes, my headache was gone, my pain, everything was gone." My question for you is, how do you make it so clean that it just absorbs in? And I said, "Can I see your roller bottle?" And I opened up the cap, and she had not removed the barrier between the herbs and the roller, and so wasn't getting anything on her skin. It was
Oh my
still
goodness!
completely isolated in the roll-on. And I took it off and I rolled it, and I showed her, actually you can feel it. It's not that clean. It kind of is a little sticky. Sorry about that. And both of our minds, I think, were blown by how effective expecting pain relief was at relieving pain.
That's great. Well, I think we've kind of given the whole idea of why it's good to kind of go beyond the idea of just what maybe a study shows and look deeper into the relationship between plants and people, which is what energetics is all about, and why it's valuable to study these traditional systems of energetics.
And I think that people experience so many types of discomfort, or I think of it as suffering, that isn't recognized by mainstream medicine, right? Like mainstream medicine says, okay, either you're in pain or you're anxious, but like there's not a lot of flavors of discomfort that modern medicine wants to address or has the ability to address. And I think that herbs shine here, like there's no drug for menopause, and I would argue menopause is not a disease.
Yep.
And so mainstream medicine largely ignores it. And yet, a lot of people that go through menopause have intense discomfort or suffering. And I have seen herbs that impart the sensation of coolness alleviate so much suffering from people in menopause that are experiencing way too much sensation of heat.
Yes.
And I think that extends, to all types of diseases and disorders, like the low level sensory discomfort that you get from being dried out that
Right.
responds to demulcents. Being dried out isn't a medical diagnosis. You aren't acutely dehydrated. Getting an IV of fluids is not going to fix that feeling. It's a feeling of dryness that demulcents fix.
That's right.
Or feelings of stagnation, or feelings of heat or colds, or all types of feelings can be directly modulated and tweaked by the constituents of plants, and we ignore 2,000 years of recorded observation on how to identify and address this, like at our own peril. It's kind of what herbalists should be largely focused on.
Right. Well, thank you, Thomas, for being with us today. We're going to put links to Thomas's school and how to get a hold of him in the information below. And we hope to have you on again very soon. And so thanks for joining us today in Healthy Conversations. Thank you, Thomas, for being with us.
Thanks, Stephen.
Hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to catch future episodes of Healthy Conversations. Help us educate others by sharing this video, and please feel free to share your own thoughts, comments, and questions below. To learn more, check out the links below.